Hello everyone, I record this video for the ERD question in assignment 4. Here, according to the business rule, each employee has an employee number, name, date of hire, and title. These attributes are the common shared attributes for every employee. And then if an employee is an inspector, here this is inspector is actually an entity subtype. Then the date of certification and the renew date for that certification should also be recorded in the system. The certificate date and the renew date are unique characteristics, unique attributes which are only associated with the inspector entity. All dependents must be associated with one and only one employee. Each employee may have many dependents, and the dependent belong to only one employee. So here we can tell there is a one-to-many relationship between employee and dependent. Some employee will have dependents, while some will not have dependents, while others will have many dependents. So here we can see the dependent is in the optional participation in this relationship. So the minimum kinetic of dependent in this employee has dependent relationship is 0. I think we have seen this employee has dependent relationship many times. Here, this is a identifying relationship, and the employee and the dependent in this case is a weak entity. And the employee may be an inspector, and the inspector must be an employee. Here we can see there is a one-to-one relationship between employee and inspector, and since here an inspector must be an employee, the employee is in the mandatory participation in this relationship, but inspector is in an optional participation in this relationship. If you still remember the characteristic of the specialization hierarchy, so we always say entity subtype is a entity supertype. So it's a relationship. Okay, so for the ERD equation, you need to not only create a ERD, but also use the text box, the text object to indicate the subtype discriminator, which attribute in the entity supertype, the employee entity, is a subtype discriminator, and you also need to indicate the partial total, partial full completeness constraint. Okay, here are so first of all, let's see the relationship between employee and inspector. This is a one-to-one relationship. An employee may be an inspector, and the inspector must be an employee. Here, the primary key in the inspector table is still the employee number. The entity subtype will inherit the primary key from its entity supertype. And the employee is inspector. This attribute is a subtype discriminator. The reason why we don't use, for example, like an employee type as subtype discriminator in this case is because according to the business rule, we only have one entity subtype. So you don't need to create an entity. You don't need to create an attribute called employee type and user, for example, use this I or P or A to indicate the entity subtype because it's only one entity subtype. So you only need to use a Boolean type to indicate if this record is inspector or not. By the way, the allowed data value for Boolean type is either true or false. Okay, so and here this relationship, I think this picture has a typo. This relationship should also be depicted as a solid line because this dependent table represents a weak entity and it has a composite primary key. Part of its primary key, this employee number, is inherited from employee table. And regarding the destroying overlapping constraint, so you don't need to indicate it in this case because, again, according to the business rules, we only have one entity subtype in this case. So there is nothing, no other entity subtype can be disjoined or overlapped with this inspector table. So there is no need to indicate the disjoint or overlapping constraint. And regarding the partial full completeness constraint, this is a partial completeness constraint. Because according to the business rule, some employee may not be an inspector, which means some records in the employee table may not appear in the inspector table. So this is not a full completeness constraint. By the way, so in any entity supertype and entity subtype hierarchy, if you only see one entity subtype, it's always a partial completeness constraint, because if it's a total completeness constraint, it means every employee must also be an inspector. So this also means these two tables, these two entities are actually the same thing. So if that's a full total completeness constraint, there is no need to remain these two tables because they are simply the same thing. Okay, so I would like to show you how to create this ERD in MySQL Workbench. The first table we have here is the employee table, and the primary key employee number, and then we have employee SSN, should be in an int data type. Employee's first name, employee's last name, employee's street information, employees city. Employee state. For the state, you can use a char data type because it's always 2 characters. Employee zip code. Employee's phone number. So here you can use the char data type, or you can use a big int. I don't have a specific requirement for the data type as long as it makes sense. Employees email. And employees, this is a hire date. Should be in a date data type. And employee's title. So this employee is inspector or not attribute is the subtype discriminator. So as I said, you should set it as a Boolean. The last one, employees notes. So for this employee is inspector attribute, so if you want to insert data value, so it's not a requirement for this question. I only ask for PNG, not MWB. But if you want to insert records, the value can only be either true or false. So it's not like a yes or no or other data value. Okay, the next one, let's first create the inspector. The primary key again is still the inspector number. Oh, sorry, employee number, not inspector number. And the unique attribute like inspector's certificate date, it should be in a date data type. And the certificate renew date. Okay, so this employee number in the inspector table not only serves as a primary key, but also the foreign key to maintain the one-to-many one-to-one relationship between employee and inspector. So how we build this one-to-one relationship. So if you still remember how we select the foreign key in a one-to-one relationship, we always pick up the primary key in the entity in the table which is on the mandatory side as the foreign key in the entity in the table which is on the optional side. So that's the reason in this case we will use the employee number in the inspector table as the foreign key to maintain this one-to-one relationship. So we first click the employee number in the inspector table and then the employee number in the employee table. Okay, you may see like a red icon before this employee number. It's okay, so it's fine. It's just the difference between versions. Okay, so but here this relationship now is a one-to-many relationship. We need to modify the cardinalities. So double click the relationship, foreign key. First, change it to one-to-one relationship. And then, since inspector is optional in this relationship, some employee may not be an inspector. So also unclick this checkbox, this mandatory checkbox for inspector. Then we have a one-to-one relationship between employee and the inspector. Employee is on the mandatory side, inspector is on the optional side. Then let me create the dependent table. It has a composite primary key, dependent number, and also the employee number. So the data type you choose for employee number and the column flag you set should be consistent with those you picked up for the employee number in the employee table. And then we have dependent SSN, that's also int. Dependent first name, last name, street. City, state, zip code, phone number, email, notes. Okay. The relationship between employee and dependent is a one-to-many relationship. So we always use the primary key in the entity on the one side as a foreign key in the entity in the table on the many side. So here, first click the employee number in the dependent table and then the employee number in the employee table. So this is a one-to-many relationship. We don't need to change the degree of participation. But here, since according to the business rules, some employee may not have any dependent. In other words, dependent is optional in this relationship. You also need to unclick this mandatory checkbox for dependence in this relationship. So as you can see, both relationship, if you check the relationship here, both relationships in this case are identifying relationship, which means those two tables, those two entities, they both inherit their primary key from its parent table. And let's give the relationship a name as maybe and the cardinalities here. This is 1 and 1. Here this is 0, too many. Here this is still 1, 2, 1. Here is 0, 2, 1. Okay, then the last step is please use another text box to indicate first subtype, this discriminator is which attribute is that employee is inspector in the employee table. And this is you don't need to indicate if it's a disjoint or overlapping constraint because it makes no sense. There is only one entity subtype, and then this is a partial completeness. Okay, so if you don't mention the subtype discriminator and the partial total completeness constraint, you will lose points. So make sure you have the ERD along with explanation. And this time, we only want a PNG. So please export it as a PNG and only upload that PNG to Blackboard. Okay, I think that's all for the ERD questions for assignment 4. I will upload another video about that 3 small ERDs for assignment 5 later. Thank you.